Yo, yo.
What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Holo Chronicles podcast. This is the March edition. We have got people all the way from Great Britain to Australia with us tonight, and it's pretty sweet.
It is.
We did a pod in February, right? We're like one a month now.
Pretty close. I think we straddled February and in January, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I know what you mean. Well, tonight we've got a special guest, and we're just waiting for him to hop in here. The man of the hour in the collecting world. If you are a part of any Facebook Star Wars groups, if you are on Instagram, if you follow Hakes auction sites, you know the name Jeff Jacob. He is a massive Star Wars collector, a toy collector. He collects other stuff too, but primarily Star Wars, and his collection is unreal. The stuff of Steve Sansweet and Gus Lopez level type collection. And we are blessed to have him on our show with us tonight. Josh, do you know anything about Jeff, or just is he a recent thing on your radar? Or?
Very recent, and just kind of watching some of the stuff that's available online from Hakes even was really cool. I'm excited to hear his story. You know, some of the stuff that he's got to say, and obviously a prolific collector. You know, someone that cares about a lot. I don't want to give too much away. I have a couple questions for him, but yeah, it was great.
Yeah, he recently sold 435 items out of his collection on Hakes auction site that sold for a total, with buyer's premium, $1.4 million. And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it's nuts.
He's going to have, I believe, 2 more auctions through Hakes. Yeah, we're going to let him tell a story, of course, but let me throw up a couple pictures here, just so that if there's somebody that's watching that that does not know who Jeff is, you get a little bit of an idea. This is Jeff standing in front of a display case that he built. He's a home builder. This is some of his non-Star Wars collection. So if you look close, you can see some Indiana Jones, you can see some Mask, some Transformers right above his head there. This is just non-Star Wars stuff. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. It's great.
He has a complete loose Star Wars collection, which include the 12-inch figures and the micro series, and that's a different display in his basement. He's got a display case just for his mail away packs, figure packs from like JCPenney's and Woolworths and Sears, and when you in all of the catalogs featured in the Red 5 figure book, these are 80 some different. Oh, he's here with us. Let's bring him in. Ladies and gentlemen.
Computer.
Jeff Jacob.
How are you guys?
Hey, man.
Jeff, welcome. I'm Andy. I'm the one that's been messaging you back and forth. This is my buddy Josh here. And thanks for taking a little bit of time with us this evening to talk about what you've been up to, man. You are the man of the hour in the collecting community right now, which is pretty fun, I imagine.
Yeah, no, it's been a blast. So, it's been a huge part of my life for for 3/4 of my life.
So I got some questions here for you. Josh will have some. Other people, I'm sure, will have some too. But I got the questions broken down into 3 groups.
Yep.
How you built your collection, the decision and process of selling part of it, and then what's next for you, because I know you're not done. You're not done collecting. And
yeah,
if that's even possible.
Collectors are a breed, right? We're all a breed of people that you're either a collector or you're not, right? So you don't become a collector in life. You're just born a collector, in my opinion.
Yeah, I hope so, because that would mean it's not a disease.
Yeah.
You can't help it. We were born this way, guys.
Yeah.
So, I've gone back. I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube that you've been a part of, whether it's been your channel or other people's channels. I've followed along with Hakes as they would drop videos and do little clip interviews with you. So I know you've been collecting since the mid '90s, right?
Yeah. So literally, I mean, when built Luke Skywalker and built Princess Leia came out on the shelves was when it drew my interest back in, right?
Yeah.
So
that was with the Power of the Force 2 line.
Built. I like that. It took me a second to get that, but you're right. You're right. They were all built. Han Solo.
Yeah. So it was probably, like November of '94, I think.
Yeah. So for me, we're about the same age, Jeff. And for me, what got me going back into the Star Wars stuff was when the Phantom Menace figures all came out. And I thought to myself, you know what? Now would probably be a good time to get all the old ones, and start building that collection up at that time. So that was like 99, 2000 when that kind of clicked for me. So where do you go? Like, I know now you probably deal in different circles than you did back then, but where would you go to find items? Did you start, like, I got a lot of questions here. Did you start like, I want to get a loose set first, and then I want a box set, and then I want a graded set? Did it kind of build that way, or how did you go about building it?
You got to figure this was, I graduated high school in '93. So '94, right? I didn't have much money. I was just starting out, in carpentry, and I didn't go to college. So, I was just starting out in carpentry, and I was an interior trimmer. So realistically, I started doing a lot of side jobs, for people, and that became my fluent money for my toys.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I try to teach so many people, if you can figure out a way to buy collections, and it's the problem that so many guys have is they'll buy collections and they'll hoard, and they'll get so many extra items that they're just like, this is too much for me to ever try to get rid of. I'm in debt, yada, yada, yada. If you just start off from the bat, right, and you just start selling all your extra stuff, and that funds the rest of your stuff, you're going to be way better off.
Yeah.
So many people where, the guy will hide it from his wife, and, and because he'll buy so many different collections, he'll get into it, he gets excited, but he won't sell off his extra stuff because he's too afraid, like she'll start noticing and everything else. And, he'll lose interest because his debt, for the collection is going to go up, so it's just, I've always tried to tell so many guys, anybody that I've ever mentored to kind of become a collector of vintage toys, I always told them, like, look, you cannot hold anything extra if you want to build your collection.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to constantly sell it, and it's work, right? I mean, it's, for 31 years, I mean, I would probably say I worked on my collection 2 or 3 hours a day for 31 years.
Yeah. So then as the collection builds, as you are getting things, here and there, and it's starting to get larger, when you get to a certain size, do you start a spreadsheet to kind of keep track, or at this point, your collection is massive. Like, do you have an assistant now? Like, what do you do?
I used to use like Kellerman's book.
Yes.
When I started collecting mocks, I just used Kellerman's book, and he had pretty much most of, a lot of the variants, but I would write down on the book what I had, like if it was a 12-back Leia, right? If I had a 12-back, I'd put down I had a 12-back B, and that's what I had at first, right? And so that's what I collected. I just collected one of each 12-back, didn't matter what back, until I had, 275 different mocks. And then once I got through that, I started collecting like Hot Toys, Star Wars, and a bunch of other stuff just because I ran out of vintage stuff that I loved to collect. So then I got to the point where I was like, I was in my first house and I had a bunch of modern, I had probably every modern figure and vintage figure at the time. And I said, you know what? I said, we're going to move. And from here on out, I'm just going to stay 1975 or 1977 to 1985. And then I'm going to collect every single variant of that era, because that's just what I love the most, right? So that's where, and that probably happened, I'm going to say in 2000, that had to be 2006, right around.
Yeah.
When I decision, so I sold off, I had so much newer modern stuff. So we moved out of that first house where I had my first collection displayed. Actually, the second house where I had displayed. I wish I had pictures of the first house. I never took pictures of it. It was my very first, and I didn't have, there was nothing graded, but it was all in acrylic cases, and that was my first collection. So when we moved into the second house and I did the whole basement, we did that. And then when I moved from there is when I decided to get rid of all my modern, because I knew eventually I was just going to do vintage only. And so it took me like 3 years to build the house I'm in now, to be able to do all that. And so I was just collecting every single, vintage variant package that I could at that time.
So let me put up a couple pictures here. Then just to kind of give us a scale of what you're talking about.
Yep.
For every card front. And does that include every card back or just card front?
That was, like what you're looking at is every card front variant. So I decided to collect every back variant probably the last year of collecting package stuff. So I didn't have the space at the time, believe it or not. This is all the front variants. And so I would buy them and I would stack them behind the figures because I had space behind there just enough to fit another figure.
Okay.
Right. So, I had, it was so wild. I had probably 150 figures behind all these figures. I was doing 12 back A, B, C, D, and then it was bizarre, right? When you get into the, the Boba Fett offer cards, which is 20.
Yeah.
When I got into those, I was like, holy hell, you're talking 7 different variants of that card for the back variants, right? And then there's variants to that, but there were 7 standard variants.
Yeah.
Right. So you're talking 21 figures. There's 7 different ones of each of those. Now, 3PO and R2 weren't included, so there was, 19. But still, I was like, holy hell. I was like, if I would have started collecting variant card backs when I decided to collect every card front, I probably would have had a much more successful time because stuff was a lot cheaper back in, 2008, 2009, when George Lucas announced, he was like, I'm never doing Star Wars again. A lot of guys thought, what, I got to sell right now. This is the time. And I was, it was like a buying frenzy, I remember 11, I was at an auction, in 2011, I was at an auction. And I look back and I think to myself, God, I should have just figured out how to get a loan and just bought the whole entire auction, to be honest with you, because it was incredible. It was all Tom Derby and Brian Simling had done the auction. And there was probably 5 of us on the floor bidding and maybe 10 people on the phones.
Wow.
And online, there wasn't a whole lot of people that were interested in buying at that time. So it was mind-boggling. Most of the prototypes and proof cards and everything like that didn't even sell.
Wow.
It was a bizarre time. So
in the last 32 years of you collecting, when was your sweet spot? When did you really it took it to another level? Like you were just finding things and
I was probably right around that time, right around, I'm going to say 2000 and let me think about that. 2006 or 7 to 2000, say 15. And then things ramped back up because, you know, Lucas sold off to Disney. They started movies and things like that. So then a lot of guys, as soon as that happened, a lot of guys were like, I should have never sold my collection. I'm excited to get back into it, you know. And I never collected for a sellout, right? I love this shit. I mean, this is right. I mean,
Yeah.
so you know, it's just fortunate that, you know, I mean, I always upgraded and I always sold my extras and did all this stuff, and I was able to accumulate like a high grade collection. And I'd always said, you know, it was kind of funny. I was talking to Kelly with Hakes, and he was at I always go to Chicago Toy Show, and he first started going to that toy show, you know, probably 7 years ago. And he did so well with, I can't think of the guy's name. I think his name is Brendan or Brandon. He did a really good job selling that guy's whole collection. And he did a really good job advertising it. And I just told him, I said, he didn't even know who I was. And I just walked up to the booth and I said, look, I said, one day if I decide to sell my package stuff, I think you do the best job advertising. You do the best job focusing on vintage Star Wars toys. I said, I don't think anybody else does for an auction house. I said, I probably just use you. You know, and he didn't even know who I was at the time, didn't know I had a collection of anything, you know, and it was super funny. So I walk away and I come walking back around and he's like, Jeff, hey, I looked you up. I like, your collection's great. Time, you know. So we became like friends for a while, you know, and I never mentioned it after that, you know. And I mean, we came, you know, I just turned 50 in January, and it was multiple layers. So, but go ahead. You know, I'll get to that point later because that's like the ending of where I am now.
Okay. So then, at this time, were you also getting your autographs as well, like going to conventions, or is that where how you got most of your autographs as well?
So when Star Wars Celebration started coming out, there was 50 or 60 actors at some of these, right? And I would go to every Star Wars Celebration from day one. And I'm going to say by the third one, there was probably 50 actors or actresses all there, right? And these, you're talking, you know, at that time, you could buy pre-done tickets for like 10 to 15 bucks a piece. And it didn't matter who you went for to get your signature. Now, that was probably Celebration 2. I think Celebration 3 is when Carrie Fisher came out, you know, and she was, I want to say she was still $10 at the time, you know, and I remember her line was like, you know, 200 people deep. But yeah, I mean, it was dirt cheap, you know, and you could really talk to these people. And I got to know everybody, you know. I mean, I probably seen Peter maybe probably 100 times because he was at so many shows, you know. So, you know, I mean, it was just so many different actors and actresses. And then you'd get to like when we were at like, I want to say Celebration 4 or 5, you know, that was when they were bringing in Episode 1 actors and, you know, a bunch of different cast members. I mean, really, the only person I've not met in person would be probably Harrison Ford and George Lucas as far as original cast members that signed.
Okay. So there's still some work to do.
Yeah. Jeff, you watching your interview actually with Hakes, you said that was kind of one of your biggest, that's the funnest part of collecting was going and meeting other collectors, right?
Yeah, I mean,
at these events.
So I was a carpenter and now I build homes, but I've been in construction pretty much my whole life, right? So it's a totally different environment, right? And the other part of my life is I love to work out. So two big parts of my life are people at the gym. So I call that my gym family. And then I've got construction people that I've been around for, you know, just as long as I've been collecting. So it was always refreshing to have, you know, I would go to all these shows and we became friends with a ton of people. You know, and every show we go to, we'd all go out to dinner, you know, and hang out every single time and have a blast, you know. But it was the greatest escape, right? Because for, you know, 2 or 3 days or 4 days, I didn't have to think about construction or anything, right? And there was no talk about politics or nothing. It was just all about us nerding out on the same thing we all loved, right?
Love it.
So, and that, but you know, I loved more than like Star Wars Celebration. I tell you what, there is something unique about when you go hang out at Star Wars Celebration, if you go hang out after the show and you're hanging out at the hotels and having some drinks with everybody, I mean, it's like it is such a blast, you know. And these guys come over from like Europe and everywhere else, and those guys like will drink you under the, you know, they're like professional drinkers, you know. So, but we would just have such a blast every single time. So, but yeah, you just, you know, you gain friends that I've had for life, right? I mean, I've had I have a friend that's local that I've had, you know, he's an amazing friend. He's got an amazing collection, probably one of the best superhero and comic collections in the world. You know, I've known him from almost day one, you know, and we still talk and hang out. And, you know, it's just one of those things, you know, the older you get, you lose a lot of friends in life, right? But there's certain friends, like if you have the same hobby, or, you know, like I have a lot of friends that, you know, I went to the gym with that I still am friends with today, where in normal life, you may, you know, gain and lose so many friends, but there's certain things that connect you guys for life.
Yeah.
You know, Star Wars is always a huge part of that.
Josh, would you say that's true about you and me?
Yeah, that's pretty much that's our story.
Yeah.
It's a friendship through collection. I mean, Andy, yeah.
Doesn't matter what anything's going on in life. You know, the world could be coming to a halt and you could go to a Star Wars show and it didn't even matter, right? You were just there and you could just nerd out and have a great time, and you didn't talk about anything except for your hobby.
That's great.
That
stuck with me, Jeff, when I heard that. That stuck with me because I was like, yeah, that's because we, you know, Andy and I's story, which we've told on here before, was the COVID lockdown, which I think was a big story for a lot of new collectors out there. Not that Andy was a new collector, or even we were just really shallow. Like I just grabbed stuff that I liked and I stuffed it somewhere. It wasn't a display. It wasn't anything. But right. Yeah, we definitely went. COVID brought us, you know, into this community that we're in right now, which was like you just described it. Like I didn't know that existed. Right. And it was just fantastic, you know, great friends, great people. And yeah, you can spend your entire time with them only talking about what you said, your hobby, only talking about what you kind of love and what you enjoy, instead of having to cover all the bases. You're just like, no, we just have one objective here. You know?
Talk about real life, right? You could just talk about the hobby, and there's so much to talk about in the hobby, and there's so much to talk about. You know, you could get into any conversation if you're loose, or it's carded, or it's packaged, or it's bootlegs, or it's, you know, I mean, it's just a never ending conversation, right? Yeah. You know, and I mean, so many times.
And to that point, like, you know, this last year, we're in Washington State. Like, I flew to Georgia for Joe Fest in Augusta just to see some guys. Yeah. Right. Because they had moved from internet buddies to friends. Like it's not a category anymore. They're just my friends now. Yep. And I'm probably going to do it again this summer, you know? So like, it is the best part. It's the best part. Getting stuff's awesome.
You know, and I helped a lot of friends. I helped one friend that's local, you know, I met him, his name's Matt Kerpaski. You know, I met him at probably, because the only show I ever set up at, just because I didn't care to sell toys at toy shows, right? It was always my hobby, but there was no way I was going to be waiting in lines or whatever at Star Wars Celebration. So I always bought a booth. And so I was at, you know, we were in Florida. I want to say this was probably Celebration 4 or 5. And this guy, Matt, had messaged me, and he came to my booth and he bought his first figure. And I found out that he lived in Colorado, and, you know, he didn't know like anything about Star Wars, right? And so I kind of took him in and I brought him over, and he was just like overwhelmed. But I taught him what to do and how to do it and what to look for and what collections to buy. And sometimes I'd buy a collection and I'd split it with him just to kind of get him to understand how to do everything. And now he's got probably, I would bet that he's got one of the top 10 carded collections in the world.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. Well, let me ask you one more question here about building your collection, and then we'll get to the selling part of it. On a video that I watched, I think I know the answer to this, but this intrigued me. On a video that I watched that you were doing a little basement tour.
Yep.
And and I believe it was your wife that had mentioned you had, like, stocks weren't going as well as you would like, and she might have encouraged you to pull some money out and invest in the Star Wars 3-packs.
Yeah. So quick thing on that, right? I've never, right? I don't know a whole lot about the stock market. So at the time we had, a smaller amount of money, invest in that. I've always invested in myself and what I know and real estate and everything. I always invested in something that I felt like I had control over.
Yeah.
But at the time, we were at that auction that I was telling you about for Brian and Tom, and nobody bought the 3-packs. And I, right, 8 or 10 years after collecting, and I'd never even seen one 3-pack in person.
Mm.
And so when the whole set was available, it was the way that I decided to buy it was I was talking to my wife, and my wife was like, you know what? She's like, you should just liquidate every single stock and just buy the 3-packs. I mean, it was 100, I think it was $100,000 or something like that. But then it would have had a 20% buyer premium on it. And so I talked to Tom and Brian, and Tom, realistically, I bought pretty much, I didn't belong to a ton of groups of people. I would buy through Tom Derby and I would buy through eBay. And that's pretty much how I built my whole collection. Right. So Tom contacted me and I said, hey, I'm interested in the 3-packs. I said, but I'm not going to pay, since they didn't sell. I said, I'm not going to pay the premium. I said, I would pay the $100,000 that they started for, which we had $100,000 invested in the stocks. So we cashed out every bit of the stock and bought the figures, and, never kind of looked back, and I never reinvested in the stock market my whole life.
So was the intention to buy him as an investment or to add to the collection?
Never had them in my collection. So I,
that was my question. Have you ever bought anything for investment?
I never bought anything as like an investment, right? But just because I love this stuff. I mean, there's so many different, and I'll get onto that when I decide to sell, right? But when you have, say, 100 figures, it's not as stressful to own a collection, right?
Yeah.
When you have over 1,000 figures, it becomes very stressful, and you're thinking every piece has a story to it. And I was like, if something ever happened to my house, or a flood or a fire, and we had a fire that was close to us, it really stressed me out. I was like, man, if it took my collection, every memory and every story behind every piece I've owned is just wiped out instantly, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, God, that was one layer of why.
Yeah. Here's a picture of the 3-packs here. I screen grabbed off of
that was
video.
Right after I got them.
That's pretty awesome. It's such a cool little side quest.
Yeah.
What's the strangest little collector side quest you've gone over the years that you think?
I'll tell you truthfully, it's probably right now, right? Because I had a chance. I could have bought bootlegs for so many years, but I always stayed strictly production. And I've had, I had the 12-inch line prototypes. I had every prototype of the 12-inch line, but I always forced myself to stay out of that lane, because I didn't care to be an investor in it. I love the production stuff. I didn't remember prototypes as a kid, right? And so many guys, they'll talk about, prototypes and this and that. A lot of times guys buy prototypes because the value of them does, increase greatly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you're looking at the Rocket Fet that sold for over $1 million this year, my double telescoping bin was just as rare as that piece.
Yeah.
There's like nobody talked about it, but that piece, there was two other Boba Fett's with the boxes, with the double rockets, with the paperwork, everything, so there's not, at the time they spoke about like it was the only one in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, and everybody stayed quiet about it. And, I know who the seller was. And I mean, I was really happy for him. He's a friend of mine, so he did really well. And I was it was just exciting to see a Star Wars toy, any toy, go up above $1 million, right? And then you're kind of in the comic league, right? So I remember first comics broke 1 million, which was probably 2009. Batman and Superman at the same time broke 1 million.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, there even like what I'm learning, whether the economy is good or bad, the high end stuff always holds.
yep.
And not just holds, but still is worth the investment over time, you know. So all right, let's move into selling. And Hakes started promoting your first sale. Now you're doing 3, right? Is that what I understand?
2 years worth of sales. So there's 3 this year and 3 next year.
Okay. So you got some more coming. But Hakes, I thought, did a fantastic job promoting this.
Yep.
But before you got there, 2 questions. When you were weighing the pros and cons of like, okay, am I ready to do this? Do I want to do this? What was your biggest con? Like maybe what was holding you back from getting there? And then after that, how do you decide what goes into the auction? Because you have an immense collection, like, or is this all? Are these all your doubles?
No, when you decide, right? One thing when you decide to sell, for me, for one, I couldn't get out total. The thing that I loved more than anything was I loved loose Star Wars collecting, right? When I start collecting vintage Star Wars when I was first starting, right? The first thing you do is you collect all the play sets, you collect all the loose figures. That's exciting, right? And then you get into the package stuff, and then you go that route. You know, for me, like the GI Joe card art from package standpoint is my most favorite. Master of the Universe probably second most favorite, and then I love Star Wars, right? But as far as like my most favorite was always GI Joe. I think the card art was just unique and one of a kind.
100% with you.
So for me, there was like layers, right? So, you know, I'd always kind of had in the back of my head, the collection just kept growing. And I mean, you're talking, my basement was 3,900 square feet, right? And I mean, it just consumed massive amount of area. You know, like I'd go on vacation or no matter what happened, right? You're always kind of a little stressed about the house, and, you know, if somebody's going to break in the house, there's always a level of stress when you have that, you know, collection. Primarily not so much as break in, but more like, you know, if a fire started or flood happened, you know, every memory just instantly dissolves, right? So that weighed on me for a few years after I got the collection up to a certain size. And then I have a friend, I live in a community where I have a friend who is a treasure hunter, and he's 72 years old. He's got one of the most amazing collections in the world. I mean, he's got like Wyatt Earp's gun. He's got, you know, all these guns from like gunslingers back in, you know, early on. I mean, just unbelievable stuff, right?
That's cool.
And his daughter came up to me at the clubhouse, and she says, Jeff, she says, what's your plan to do with your collection? And I said, I don't really have a plan. You know, I said, I'm 50, so I don't really think about it, or I'm going to be 50, so I don't really think about it. And she said, well, my dad, you know, she's like, I know that he's getting older. And she's like, I asked him, like, what do you want me to do with your collection if something ever happened to you? And he said, I don't really care what you do with my collection. It's up to you. You can do whatever you want. And when she told me that, that really hit me hard. And I was, there's no, for one, right, it becomes a burden to your spouse, right? If you're with your spouse, I've been with my wife since high school. So she's been with me since I first started collecting. So it's a part of me. It's a part of everything that I love, right? And she's always been 100% on board and super supportive. So I was like, man, if something happened to me, just looking at something Star Wars is going to remind her of me. So I was like, it's going to be like overwhelming for her to try to figure out what to do. And we had in plans in the will what I told her to do with it. But I was like, that night when he told me that, or she told me that, I was like, man, I would much rather watch my collection get distributed to thousands of collections, right? and see them add it to their collection, the excitement they could have for their collection. And that story behind my collection is why we all collect, right? It's the stories behind the pieces. So that was like one massive, like it hit me, and I was like, oh man, I was like, and secondly, we designed another house because I'm a builder, right? I build custom homes, and if you're a builder and you're not building another house, you're not using your total benefit. So I was like, man, I designed another room, and this one was going to be all into the garage, so it was not going to be spread out, and but it would have cost probably $500,000 to create the room. And I was like, man, that's a lot of money just to add the room. And I was like, then I have to move it all, I have to build it all, and these are things that I do myself, right? I built all my stuff myself. So I was like, that took, it was probably a year off and on of my time just to build the room. So I was like, I really am having a tough time with moving all that. Like if it was just the loose collection, you can just build display cases, and those are fairly easy to build for me. But when you have to build everything built in for mocks and for, mint sealed box items, I mean, it's layers and layers of stuff to do. So that was another thing that just kind of hit to me. And I was like, man, I didn't need the money for any reason, thankfully. But I want to have, my kids are older. My son's 23 and my daughter's going to be 18 next week. And so as your kids get older, you want them to spend more time with you, right? I want my kids to work for me because I'm just that selfish. I want to stay with the rest of life, right? So when they get older, they move out, and then you got to do everything. I go watch UFC fights with my son every Saturday night just to go spend time with him. So I was like, man, I need to get like a vacation home in Florida, so that way I can kind of force my kids to be with me at a week at a time, right? I could just say, hey, I bought you tickets. You're coming down. And you can bring your spouse, you can bring your, your boyfriend, whatever, but you're all going to come down. And so that becomes more important to me as far as family goes. And then I could still collect for the rest of my life because I not, just like all my package stuff, I not only collect Star Wars, but I collect every loose, foreign Transformer, every loose foreign He-Man, I just got done collecting every G.I. Joe loose from Brazil. There's 124 different ones, right? And it's exciting for me now collecting because I can get like 124 pieces for a fraction of a cost that maybe 2 pieces would cost me that I was looking for 15 years packaged, right? So to add that to my collection and have that, it's just been exciting as hell, and I can find a ton of stuff, and but it wasn't. The funny thing was, I was sitting in my office right where we're sitting right here, and I made the mental decision. I said, you know what? I came home from that night at the club, and that was kind of the icing on the top. So I text Kelly, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about selling my collection. I said, I'm only going to sell it through you guys because I think you do the best job. I said, and you have to negotiate, right? You got to negotiate if you're going to sell something like that. You got to negotiate the costs, and everything had to be right. So it was like a week of negotiating, and finally a week later, he texted me back and he said, okay, everybody agreed to everything, so we're good to go. And so I hadn't said, even a word to my wife, right? And so when I agreed to it, and I told him, I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go through with it. I was like sitting in here in my office texting him, and I went in the living room with my wife, and I told her, I said, hey, I just decided it's been a week, but I made a decision, and I'm selling my whole package collection. And she looked at me and she was like, you're so funny, yeah, what? You're never gonna tell you stuff. And I said, no, babe, I said, I just agreed, and we just agreed on what it's going to do and how it's, and I talked to Kelly, and I told him, I said, look, I said, advertising and the way that he goes to toy shows and advertises, I said, these are the things, right? I think he does such an amazing job doing all that, right? If I'm going to do it, I want to make sure that it's fully exposed to the world. I think sometimes you'll see stuff on Heritage that they don't advertise anything. And there's some amazing Star Wars collectibles on there, but they don't do anything for advertising.
So when you guys finally make the deal, and you start talking about how it's going to happen, and advertising on social media and all that. One of the really, really cool things that I thought that you guys did as a collaboration, and I want to know whose idea it was, but in every item that you sell, there's a decal that says Jeff Jacob Collection on it.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's, to me, that's like, it's like, now you've got the gold jacket, Hall of Fame. Your legacy as a collector is now sealed. And I think that's so cool. Like, whose decision was that? And that is such an awesome thing.
That was 100% mine. I'll explain why. So comics do pedigrees, okay?
Yeah.
One of the largest comic collections ever found in life came from my flea market right here in Colorado back in early 1980s, or might even have been late 1970s. And it was the Mile High comic collection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was when that collection was found, he put the pedigree to the collection so that his collection would always be connected to the Mile High collection, right? And
yeah.
You know what I said, and you have to have, right? You have to have a significant collection to become a pedigree, right? And so I had talked to Kelly, and hey, I said, I think that, you know, my collection definitely deserves to be a pedigree, you know, and you know, we need to connect a name, and we need to give them a COA, you know, and it was a big thing for them because they've never done a pedigree collection through the auction house where they create the pedigree, right? And so Jippy, the owner of Hakes and everything else, you know, it had to go through him, and he said, you know what, I think your collection is significant enough that you can call it a pedigree, because I've been collecting it for years. Not only that, but I've been involved in the community my whole life, right? From Rebel Scum days to Facebook groups to everything, you know. I've sold it. Just let me give you an example. I've graded with AFA. I've graded over 17,000 items.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes.
Hakes has 3,100 of my graded items. So you can see how many items that I pushed out to the community for the last, since 2002, with them grading items, right? So, I mean, over, 12,000 items that I, cleaned and brought in from collections and sent out to get graded, and then put them on eBay and did my due diligence and sold to all these collectors throughout the world, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, everybody's dealt with me, never had a band, and, knock on wood, right? But I've never done anybody wrong in the hobby. I've never done anybody bad. I've always stood behind everything I sold. If they weren't happy, send it back. It didn't matter what it was, right? So all of those go into factor when they decided, hey, we believe that you are a pedigree to be able to do this, right? And it was, for them, right? They had to come up with the printouts. They had to do all the printouts. They had to send them all to me. I had to sign every single one of them. And the thing that makes it great, right, when you can do that, is you have to have it graded so that it's got a grade number connected to it, so that's how they're able to do like comics pedigree, right? So you'll comic and it'll have the pedigree on the top. So
that's such a cool idea. I'm glad you did that, Jeff. I think, like you said, it's worth knowing. Like, it's the provenance behind it has a story that's connected to you. Now it will live on well past, when we're gone, and
happier than anything is when all these guys, right? I don't know who bought what, right? Doesn't share that information. But I'll have guys reach out to me constantly, they'll have just paid it off or whatever. And they're like, Jeff, I got these 5 items from your collection. I'm like, hey, you got to show me that you put them in your collection and give me that picture, right? And, that is like so exciting for me to see how we're just temporary holders of this stuff anyhow, right? I mean, we're all one day. So it's great that I'm alive and I'm enjoying these things, go out to so many people, and it's expanded my collecting adventure, right? Because collecting bootlegs is like, it's probably a 10-year thing, right? I mean, there's so many bootleg Star Wars alone.
Yeah.
let alone the bootlegs of every other toy line,
Yeah.
So it's been such a blessing, to be honest with you, because for years, when you collect package stuff, I might have found 10 items to add to my collection a year.
Mm.
Right. It's tough to stay excited all the time when you're only adding that few of items and at that time they're very expensive, right? Some of these are super expensive. But when you're buying all this loose stuff, it's just been overwhelming. It's like I felt like I restarted collecting again.
Yeah.
So many things when I decided to do that. There were so many things that I could collect. I was like, man, this is just out of the world. Every variant that I didn't even think about for vintage Star Wars, I thought I had so many of them. I just recently, like I had figured out probably 6 months ago that there was so many different lettered sabers for Vader and for Ben and for Luke, but it was never really brought to light. Even the grading companies would even put lettered saber. They wouldn't document whatever.
Yeah.
So villain variant is just killer. And the guy that I bought my Vaders from, he was the one who gave all the information to that guy. It was so wild. I reached out and I just said, hey, if anybody's selling letter sabers, and this guy Oscar reached out to me and he said, hey, I've had them for years. I collected them for so many years. I could use the money. And I mean, when he sent them to me, they were like, every one of them was flawless. So he must have like done the same thing, right? Upgraded every single one of them. Every saber was in like flawless shape. I mean, I couldn't have been happier. I mean, right? So my point is, I got like 56 loose Darth Vaders. I was more excited about. I would have paid. I paid like $6,200 for that, right? Now I would have bought a packaged item for $6,200, and I would have got excited. It would have been nice, but it's like one single item you add, you put it on the wall. This was like an abundance, right? I was overwhelmed by it that I was just like, man, this is just so cool. And, I loved, and now, I mean, I've been after the Bens and the Lukes, and it'll probably take me, I don't really think there's many guys out there that do Bens and Lukes, like as far as a focus, maybe more on the Luke side, but it's just a coincidence that one guy decided to sell his, I don't know that anybody else would. So it'll be, like I said, I think it's 10 years of collecting saber variants to get all the Bens and all the Lukes.
I saw that you posted a picture and a video on your Facebook, and you had a pool table full of loose graded Vaders, and it would just look so cool all together like that.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
I would have known that information, but it wasn't ever really talked about, right? Because nobody really said, hey, there's A through Z minus a couple letters, and there's double A through double N of every single saber. And then you get to Lily Letty, there's, A through whatever.
Yeah.
Just like, man, I was like, that's like hot for me.
So back to the Hakes auction, like I would check in on that once it got posted. I'd check in on that, a couple of times a week just to see where things were going. And when that ended, what were you shocked by? Was there anything that shocked you, either high or I thought that might have gone?
No.
I thought I was going to go for more. How was that when it ended for you?
I'll tell you this. So after it ended, I went through every item and I wrote it down. And you get the Hakes magazine, right? So I wrote down every price. And believe it or not, I mean, it's weird how I could tell you what I probably paid for 3/4 of every single thing in the book.
Dang.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just weird how that just sits in your memory. So I went through every single thing, right? And there were things that went for way over what I thought they'd go for. But there was so many things that went for a little lower than I thought. There were things that went for average price. But in the big picture, I was happy with overall.
Yeah.
Things did really, really well, because there were some things that went for maybe even less than I paid for them, There were some mailers, like the mailers didn't really do like amazing prices. People don't realize how hard the mailers are.
Yeah.
not many people even have ever collected them. There's very few mailer collectors. I probably had 2 guys that were my competition, because there was just very few guys that even knew about the information about them. Right. So some of those I would spend, whatever it took sometimes to get it, because it would take me 5 years to add, that one, and I'd never seen it. So the mailers didn't go as well, but then thankfully some of the other stuff did really well. I knew that some of the stuff like the, a lot of guys were kind of freaked out about the R2D2 with the dark dome with the skew. I can tell you that for years, I searched for that piece.
Mm-hmm.
For years. I'm talking, I knew about it for probably 15 years. And I was in Chicago, and this guy brought his whole collection to sell. He wanted to buy a house, and he brought every single thing that he was selling. And he had one of them graded and one not. And I was like, holy smokes, man. At the time, it was fairly expensive at the time for those. And it was probably 12 years before I just sold mine. But one of them was graded without the documentation, but when you held the 2 up next to each other, they were identical.
Yeah.
So the AFA just screwed up on the one label. So I did a deal to buy both of them and thought, so I sent both of them to AFA, and I said, look, these are both dark dome with skews. You did not label the one. They regraded it for me, and they graded it correctly. And then I sold the one, and it paid for the 2. So, that's what it's all about the information, right? If you know what you're looking for at a toy show, you can always find things, even though they're expensive. I was able to get 2 of them for what I sold one for.
Yeah.
Right. So I sold the one for what I paid for the 2, and then I held on to mine for 15 years. But I will tell you this, I didn't see another one for that whole time.
Yeah. Well, the best time to buy something is when you see it, right?
Yep. And sometimes it's just mind-boggling to even today, right? I've been collecting vintage Star Wars for my 3/4 of my life, and even today, there's things that'll pop up that somebody will document, and I'm like, just like for instance, the Red Bar R5D4, that was really not even brought to life. Nobody really knew about that until probably the last 10 years of collecting.
Yeah.
That's actually a question from one of our viewers here from Usual Mike. Like, does any vintage you find still surprise you?
No, there is. Well, especially now when I'm collecting loose bootlegs now, I did not know, and I was always around them. I could have bought them for years, but I stayed away just because I know that I'm like, when I hyper focus on collecting anything, I'm all in. So I was like, man, the bootleg world is like, it never ends. And so I was like, I'm just going to stay focused on just production because there's plenty enough, right? And so when I got into bootlegs, especially like model trims, I didn't know that there were so many variants. So when I started collecting over the last 7 or 8 months, I got some Vaders, and I've got like 4 different mold Vaders. And I didn't, I never knew that they did that many. And there's probably more than that.
Yeah.
There's just not enough documentation on them. Joe, and I don't want to butcher his name, Iglesias, I think is his last name. He's always been, he's collected ever since I started collecting. I've known him for a lot of years. But he was always a bootleg collector, from day one. And he would always post, beautiful bootlegs. They were always dead mint, and, because he was collecting from day one. And I always was like, man, it was intriguing so many times, but there's so many just wacky looking variants, right? When I see something back then that was different color than I was used to seeing, it just mentally threw me off because I loved what I loved as a child, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, but as an adult now, the more wacky looking it is, the more that I'm into it, right? It's just
That's awesome.
It's just kind of cool.
Yeah.
Oh, how we mature.
As a variant of the vintage line. That's all I care about.
Loose variant figures.
Yep, of the vintage line.
Of the vintage line.
Polish, they're Polish, Uze, whatever it is, Hungarian, whatever it is, as long as, of the vintage toy line. I don't like anything that's on, you know, bootlegs of newer stuff, but you know, anything that's of the vintage loose, you know, line that's duplicate to it. So anything that's the first 12 characters or whatever, you know, Empire characters, Jedi characters, Power of the Force.
There were a couple of items in that Hakes sale that I was shocked by. Like I knew that these were high-end items. And even still, I don't really know what I was expecting, but I saw the sale prices on them and I just went, wow. Like, of course, the double telescoping Obi-Wan, first of all, beautiful item. And then here's a picture of the one that really, like, I just loved. I think that's amazing, and that's an amazing price for it.
I owned that as a kid. That's insane.
Megatron and Prime, man. I mean, and I did not add them to my collection. It was crazy. I always wanted them, but I did not collect packaged stuff until I built the house I'm in right now, and I had space for it. And that was probably 10 or 12 years ago is when I started collecting all the packaged. Now I had the GI Joes. So, you know, in my old house, and I had every single one of them. It's probably the highest graded collection in the world at the time. I was so afraid of the rubber bands breaking on them, but I loved the card art so much. But my collection was literally like 85s and 90s. I had half of them were 90s and half of them were 85s. So they were like the highest ever. So my double telescoping figures, Tom had a client that dropped off his whole collection that Tom had put together over 10 years for him. And like the government was coming after him or something. It was a really crazy deal. So Tom had to sell a bunch of stuff because the guy owed him like 200 grand. So Tom sent out this list to all of his clients, and the 3 double telescoping figures were on that. And at the time, it was like 50 grand for all 3. This was, you know, probably, I mean, and that was high at the time. That was at least 15 to 18 years ago, right? So at the time, for one, I didn't have that much cash, but he had a client that was putting together, he was trying to put together an AFA 90 GI Joe collection. And he knew I had so many Joes, and I've never got rid of anything out of my collection, but I was so afraid of the Joes breaking at the time that I told Tom, I said, you know what? I said, I would trade you my GI Joe collection for the 3DTs. And so that was, you know, that was probably 2011, I want to say.
Wow. What a deal.
And then when I bought this house and I knew I had space, I recollected the GI Joes because I love the card art, but I didn't care as much about condition. You know, let me back up. When I was telling you about that auction that Tom and Brian did way back in like 2008. It was called the Premier Toy Auction. A guy had the best GI Joe collection in the world that put in that auction, and I'm sitting there, and I had already had them all, and mine were probably graded like 80s or 75s and 80s and maybe some 85s, and I'm sitting there, and everything that this guy had was like 90s or high 85s, and the prices were so low that I was like, my God, that's cheaper for a 90 than I paid for my 80. So every time it would come up, I couldn't stop myself. I was like, yep, no, I'll take that one. I would sell mine for probably more than I bought the 90 for. So I bought, I want to say 50 90s at that show, right? And so then later on in life, that's what Tom wanted my collection for. It was because of that, and that's what I traded for that, and I was able to recollect the Joes later on in life, and here we are today.
Win-win. So I know we're getting close to that hour mark, and I want to honor your time here. So let's just do a few rapid fire questions. Josh, I know there's a few from the comments, and then I have a couple as well. Real quick, how many life-size statues do you have?
So I'm getting one shipped to me right now that nobody. So I've got Boba Fett, but That's the one from that's the production one. But my Jawa was done by Regal Robot, right? So it's a unique, almost one of a kind. You know, that's made off of the Lucasfilm from 1977, so it's identical. They mold it, they characterize it off of. They go to Lucasfilm to build that, right?
Cool.
My Chewie was done the same way, and there's only 2 Chewies out there. A friend of mine owns the other one, but both of them have different poses. And I just got, which I'll let you guys know, which I've been working on this with him for, I'm going to say 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Kind of forgot about it, to be honest with you. And I forgot about it. And he finally came back to me and said, hey, we'll go ahead and do. So I'll tell you this. I wanted a low gray and I wanted a wicket. And so I put money down to do both of them. And he came back to me like a year and a half later. He said, look, he says, I cannot do the low gray. We cannot find the fur to duplicate it identically. He says, but I can do the wicket. So they literally just shipped my wicket. And it is, I mean, as identical to the screen wicket that you'll ever see in your life. And it's the only one they've ever done.
Wow.
So I'm super excited to add that to my collection. So
I'm excited for you.
Yeah. So, but yeah, those will stay in my collection for life, right? The loose, you know, and the loose don't, you know, the loose don't have that significance of the package stuff, right? You got to think about packaged. If water hits it, it ruins it. If water hits loose stuff, well, you just clean it off. No big deal, right?
Yeah.
Not as much stress to hold. And I still have like every representation of everything I've sold packaged, I have it loose. Right. So it's a blast for that. And, you know, we're talking about some other stuff with Regal Robot to do. You know, I would love a Tuscan Raider full size, and they've done a bust of it. So they think they can probably do a full size. So a few other things, you know, I would love to have different pieces and my wife, again, in the new house, she's cool enough that she's like, you know what, those type pieces, I don't care where you put them in the house.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah. So those type pieces, you know, and everybody that ever comes over, right? The most pictures taken is with Chewy. I mean, that's like,
Oh, yeah.
everybody over does anything about what it is. They all want a picture with Chewy, right?
Is he 7 feet tall?
He's identical to the 1977, molded off the hands of Peter and everything. I mean, he is flawless.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Have you ever graded through CAS or UKG?
So, you know what? UKG at first was, and I'm not bashing them, but they were not grading correctly, right? So if they graded something an 85, it was equivalent to like a 75 through CAS or AFA.
Okay.
Just they redid all their casing over the last probably year, and their grading scale has changed. So if you buy an 85 through them now, I mean, I have a guy that's getting, you know, he's over there and he submits a ton of POC figures, and he sends them to me first before he sends them to anybody. And I've been able to add, that is a tough loose line.
Yeah.
But every time he just sent me stuff 2 days ago, and I was able to do a deal with about 6 more pieces. But they come, you know, the new ones that are coming in, the 85s or the 80s are identical in grade quality to CAS or AFA. And AFA is probably the most strict, you know, like for grade quality per grade. But UKG is doing a great job, and their new casing is really good. As far as CAS, AFA does not do model trims, and they don't do bootleg stuff. So I don't mind. I've been buying from one guy a ton of CAS bootleg Polish figures, and I'll keep them, you know. So I just was like, you know what? Since CAS does that, I'll just grade all my Polish bootlegs and my model trims through CAS. They do a great job with display. It's not so much about the grade for me on some of those. It's more just about getting them in acrylic so that it looks the same as my other figures.
Yeah, documented and protected. Yeah. Last question that I have, and then Josh, you can ask a few. So is this, as far as impact on your kids, is this dad's thing, or is this something that your kids might carry on the mantle for?
So my kids have, like I said, they've been with it since they've been alive.
Yeah.
So they, it's always been fun for them, and they've gone to so many shows and Star Wars celebrations, and they've had a blast. But they have zero interest in it because they've been their whole. Like I said, you're either born a collector or you're not, right?
Yeah.
You don't just wake up at 25 years old and go, you know what? I think I'm gonna start collecting X and X. I mean, when I was 6 or 7, I remember like I had a best friend that I met when I was probably 7, and I had stompers in a case at school,
Yes.
right? And I had probably 6 or 8 of them. And he was like a year older than me. I was afraid he was going to steal my stompers, right? But I can remember from early on, right? From that was one of the first early on things I knew that I was a collector, right? I just had it innately in me. So I've always loved collecting stuff ever since.
Are you going to Celebration in Japan?
I am not.
Okay. Just
Yep.
curious. Just
I
curious.
go there, and Hakes wanted me to go there, and a bunch of stuff, but I'm so busy right now doing custom building homes, and we just went out to Florida and just put money down on a lot out there to get the first house going out there for a vacation home. And so I just have so much stuff going on that, and we're going to take our kids out there to show them everything. And normally I never miss a Chicago toy show. This will be my first year that I'm going to miss the April Chicago toy show, which I'm super bummed about, but my kids mean more. So we're going out to Florida to show them where we're going to build a vacation house at and take them out there because both their birthdays are really close to each other. So I just said, hey, we'll just take you out there and we'll have a great time.
Awesome.
Josh, what were some of the
So we got a few questions in there. One of them comes from Jeff Barker. He's just asking, do you still think there's some large carded barn find stashes out there to be found?
100%. Yeah, there's, there's still stuff. I have a toy store just because I love to have it, not because, we don't make money really necessarily on it. And the gal that runs it, I kind of let her take over the whole finances, and she can do whatever she wants. As long as every collection that comes in, she calls me and she says, hey, we got another vintage collection of X and X and X. And I just go cherry pick whatever I want.
So it's a front. You basically have a front for your collecting business. Gotcha.
We don't buy. We started the store and we said we never buy any new product, right? We only want people to bring stuff into us. It takes a couple years. You have to really keep going at that and not falter, right? You've got to stay to that. And now we've had it for 6 years, and I expanded it in the next store, next building next to it. But I mean, we probably get 4 or 5 collections a day now.
Wow.
You'd be amazed that probably a year ago, I had this couple that called from Wyoming, and they buy hoarder houses, and they just buy them from the street. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, they just got to clean them out, and then they fix up the house and they sell it, and they do really well. They just throw away almost everything in there. And the one guy, it was the son-in-law was helping him, and he just grabbed this, like it was a brown grocery sack, and he was just going to take it out and throw it away. And when he was getting ready to throw it, he just looked in the bag and he thought, wow, that's some colorful stuff in there, right? And it had probably 65 dead mint Carter figures. Like they bought them, they put them in this bag and never,
wow.
Primarily Empire and Jedi, but it's just unbelievable that there's still stuff that gets unearthed.
Where's this store at, Jeff?
It's in Littleton.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right off of Bowles and Wadsworth in Littleton. So
what's it called? What's it called?
Primarily, what we primarily sell in there is loose everything. Right? You go in there, there's probably one of every loose vintage Star Wars, or we have 4 cases of loose Transformers. We've got Marvel Legends. We've got, you name it, it's probably in there.
Is it called Jeff's Toy Box?
Jeff's Collectible Empire.
Jeff's Collectible Empire. I'm gonna take a peek at that.
How dare you with the toy box when an empire is being built?
Exactly right. My bad.
Pretty amazing how many guys come from out of state that just travel they go to different states and they hit like every toy store in the state. And those are our biggest buyers, really. They'll come in and they'll buy, $1,500 worth of stuff, just loose stuff. just random tons of different, because we may have a team, and it doesn't matter what it is. You never know what's going to come in the shop.
Yeah.
Treasure hunters.
Yep.
All right. We got another one. I like this one. Who's your favorite Star Wars figure, and why is it Hammerhead?
That's Rick. He asked that to everybody.
Because everybody thinks of Hammerhead, his eyes are always to the left, and you try to find the eyes to the straight and the eyes to the right, or eyes up or eyes down, then you'll really think about Hammerhead differently. Because what? Majority are always eyes to the left. I'm talking thousands that I've looked through, and you'll see most of them eyes to the left. But you try to find some of those Hammerheads where the eyes are, looking up, down, or to the opposite, and then you'll find him to be kind of a treasure.
Now I need to look at my Hammerhead.
I know.
Yep.
I know.
Yep. So funny that, but I don't necessarily have. I'll tell you truthfully, as far as loose toys, the Lily Letty loose line is probably my favorite vintage toy line because they're so unique. I don't necessarily have. Everybody loves Boba Fett, right? But I would say the first 12 are probably just my favorite because that's my childhood. I like Power of the Force, but I didn't really, that was at the end of my deal. I was interested in girls by that time.
It happens. It happens.
Power of a different force.
Like my favorite Star Wars toy is probably the AT-AT Walker. Always has been. But as far as a singular, it's so tough. So many people would always ask me that, like, what's your favorite figure? I don't really have a favorite Star Wars figure. There's too many of them that I love, right?
Yeah.
How about Transformer? That's a little more unique.
Transformer, definite. Optimus Prime is definitely my top Transformer of all time, right? You remember that as a kid more than any other Transformer.
Heck yeah.
All right. Well, then let's just go through the list. Favorite G.I. Joe?
Oh, favorite G.I. Joe is Snake Eyes with the Wolf, 100%. 1980.
Favorite He-Man?
Ooh, favorite He-Man. That would have to be just He-Man and Skeletor. All right. That reminds me more of the toy line than actually, you know what? I would say Trapjaw. Trapjaw would probably remind me more of my childhood than anything.
Okay.
Thundercat.
Oh, Lion-O. So quick story about Lion-O, which I've talked about before.
Yeah.
So when I was probably, that line came out probably when I was 10. My mom still lives in the same house that I grew up in. So she's been there for almost 70 years now. And so when my son was 10, we used to always drop the kids off at my parents' house to go to date night, right? So we drop them off. I go to date night, and let me tell you, I searched my parents' house for anything toy related. Every attic spot, I found one card back, right? Because my mom got rid of everything.
Oh wait, I have a picture of it. It's a little blurry because I screen grabbed it off a video.
The only thing I found from my childhood that I found. So I'm at dinner at PF Chang's with my wife, and my son he's like, hey, I got, are you there? And I said, yeah, what's up? And he sends me a picture, and he's holding Lion-O in his hand. And I about died, right? I was like, what? I was like, where did you find that? Well, my mom has a grand piano, and she's had it since I was born, right? So I must have, and it was like flawless. It never even looked like it had wear on it. So I must have opened it out of the package. I must have stashed it on the inner rails of the piano, and it had been there for life. And what was funny is I had helped my dad move the piano left to right in the room at least 4 times. Carpet in that house, because the carpet would always get worn, and it never fell off, right? He's got that like plastic that just grips. But like so many people are like, if something happened to your house, what would you grab? And I said, Lion-O would be 1,000,000% who I would grab first over everything, because I probably had that when I was 10. My son found it when he was 10, and that's the only toy that I have from my childhood. So for me, the Lion-O.
Amazing. That's a great story.
Yeah,
that's a great story.
That's heartwarming. Did we miss any lines? Were you? Was it a little too late to get into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Mask or anything like that?
Mask I did get into. Love the now I can't even think of the semi. What was the semi? The red semi.
Yeah. Shoot.
I can't believe I can't even think of it right now. But the semi was definitely my favorite out of Mask, and that was definitely in my era. Turtles I never did get into. Because those were, later, like I said, I was in, let me think.
Rhino. It's the Rhino. Gosh.
Rhino. Yep.
Yeah.
So Turtles, I was already kind of well into girls at that time and not into any more toys. I'm trying to think real quick. Like I loved Battle Beasts. I remember those heavily as a kid. I remember Dungeons and Dragons. There was the main bad guy. I'm trying to think of his name. But that I remember that as a kid heavily, and so I had to collect those. Anything? Oh, the 18-inch alien. I love that. I remember that as a kid. Oh, Shogun Warrior. My brother's 5 years older than me, so he had Shoguns, Warriors, and he never played with his toys, and I was the one who always played with the toys. So I remember like I'd go steal his stuff from his room. Have it, stashed away somewhere. Let me think real quick.
Were you into anything before Star Wars? Do you remember anything before that? Like Buck Rogers or Battlestar Galactica or James Bond?
Remember as a kid, but more, Star Wars. I remember, like, I have a picture when I was born in 75. So this was a picture from probably 1977 where I'm holding my first X-Wing in the air.
That's awesome. I think we all have a picture like that.
Profile on my eBay page.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, like when you said AT-AT, I have a vivid memory of being a kid and seeing that under the tree for Christmas. Like that was a huge, like it was, of course I don't have my original, but it was just because I destroyed it out in the mud. We were fighting with it every day.
I have a picture of me opening my first AT-AT with my dad at Christmas.
It's so cool.
Awesome.
I have, my sister had, when they did the latch kits, she did the R2-D2 pillow that I have as a kid in a picture. I've got a picture of me holding a plush Chewie, but no carded figures, unfortunately. I do have a picture of me holding some of my Transformers loose. But yeah, very, very few pictures, because obviously, in today's day and age, everybody takes 15 billion pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was expensive to take a picture back in our day, man.
A video or a picture back then.
Yeah, it was expensive, man. You had to go develop the film and
yep.
Never. Josh, is there any more from the chat?
Let's see. Maybe let's do one more. Yeah, this is a good one because you've talked about this loose quite a bit. So when you've collected loose, do you spend much time doing the restorations on those toys? And is that something you enjoy?
So every time that I would get packaged or loose, right, I figured out how to fix bubbles and buff bubbles and fix packages, take stickers off, clean loose figures, right? I'm going to say a quarter of my time collecting was probably cleaning up collections.
Yeah.
To make them look the best that you could get them to look, right? And I didn't know early on, Tom Derby taught me how, years later, how to manipulate, you could heat up bubbles that were dented and you could get the dent to just pop right back out without even touching it if you just applied heat really quick. I used to send my stuff to him, and then because he owned part of AFA at the time, he would fix all my bubbles the best he could. He got sick of doing it, and he was like, Jeff, when you come out, I'm just going to show you how to do it. And then I would
17,000 figures later, Jeff, I'm just going to show you how to do it.
So, but then, like my buddy Matt, that's local, he would bring all his stuff over to me because he would try it, and you could really mess stuff up if you don't really know what you're doing. You would distort the bubble, like if you try to mess up, like for whatever reason, Tri-logo bubbles you cannot fix at all. That's why you know, most of them got dents and everything. You can heat on it and it will actually, it will concave the bubble. But like most Kenner bubbles, you could manipulate those with heat and it would go right back to its original form.
That's cool.
That's really cool.
Yep.
Well, Jeff, we'll get you out of here on this. You're still actively collecting. You're not getting rid of everything because you're done collecting. What's out there still that you think one day that will be mine?
You know, I don't know enough yet about the Polish bootlegs, but I do know that there's a bunch of rarities in them. You know, and I would imagine that I'll, you know, get to that point where I understand more about them, you know, and there's, you know, there's a book out there that I've been trying to get. You just can't buy it. I think it's called Jub or something like that, but you have to buy it in the aftermarket now. I think once I get that book, I'll understand what's more rare. But you know, like I said, when I figured out that there's variants within model trims, you know, there's probably so many that are maybe one or two in the world. You just don't even know, you know, like Joe Wyatt would probably know everything about those, but so little information is really talked about. You can't really find a whole lot of information in comparison to production stuff, right? When people find all these new variants, right, of production items, you know, it just seems that everybody wants to share that information, like Red Bar R5D4, you know, as soon as really documented, you know, a lot of guys are like, oh man, I got to tell the world about this because this is a really cool variant, you know. But like I said, you think about like just think about Hammerhead with his eyes.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you. I mean, you will, you know, I'm telling you, you will now look for Hammerhead and you will always see his eyes only in the one direction.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we're Hammerhead experts.
Yeah. But what makes this hobby so intriguing, right?
Have you ever thought about doing your own, like what we're doing here? Have you ever thought about kind of just going on and sharing? Because you've mentioned like several times about documentation, about the knowledge not being out there.
Right.
And it seems like, you know, and I'm not saying this in any way, but it seems like the higher end collectors like yourself, you form a community up there with other high end collectors, and that really becomes the vault of information, right? Like it's there. As a collector, there's a little bit of protect my knowledge so that I can get the best deal. I get that, and that's okay. But for the most part, all of us are sharers as well. We share, you know, as long as I got one, I'll share how I got that one, right? And have you ever thought about doing doing a show or a, you know, podcast?
I have so many friends that'll do exactly like you just said, right? You're like, as long as I have one, then I'll boast about it, right?
Exactly. I'll tell you how I do it.
That don't have a lot of certain things that they know after I told them about it. And they're like, Jeff, don't say anything about that. You got to wait. I have to get mine. I have to get mine.
Right.
At some point, you just got to go, you know what, guys? The world, you know, the more that the world knows about it, the more they're going to be available.
Exactly.
It's not this. For a long time, there was so much secretive, like there were so many secretive groups and secretive things, and nobody really wanted, unless you're in the group, you know, they didn't want to share too much information. So I had to learn a lot of stuff on my own, you know. But I mean, Rebel Scum days were very open, and there was a lot of information that everybody shared all the time, right? And then you get to Facebook days, and I don't know if it's just that a lot of the vintage collectors were so done with sharing the information they've shared for so many times, you know, back on Rebel Scum days. But yeah, I mean, there was like Ross Barr was doing some little things where he was interviewing some guys, and I thought it was really good because these guys were showcasing things and talking about things that so many people have never seen or known about and anything. And so that was a really, really good, you know, outlet for so many collectors to kind of see the different things that are still out there and think about what you could possibly collect. And, you know, there's so many collectors that want things that nobody else has, right? And that's just their MO. They want the rarest of rare, and they don't want it if somebody else has it, you know. And that was never my MO. I didn't care. You know, everybody always used to be like, oh yeah, production's so easy. I said, you know what? Production's easy to an extent. When you collect every variant, there was 100 production carded items that I would never see, you know, that people just don't know how rare they are. So, you know, there's a lot of that. And I wouldn't mind doing something maybe with like Jeff Echtenkamp is like his knowledge on carded variants and packaged stuff is beyond this planet, right? I mean, he could tell you everything and how rare every single one of them are. But it would be great to kind of do something like we would do a blog or something where he and I would get together, and maybe a couple other longtime mock collectors could really, you know, talk about everything and how rare so many things are. Without me collecting packaged stuff anymore, right? I wouldn't care so much if, you know, if there's some things out there that I'm looking for, but Jeff might, maybe, you know, if he may not want to share some information if he's been looking for it and people don't really know how rare it is. And, you know, that's the challenge, because some guys just want to buy it for the value of it, where Jeff and I loved collecting every variant just to have every variant because we're just wackos that way. So, you know, it's a tougher thing when you think about the big picture, but, you know, I think, you know, interviews like this gives people information and, you know, little bits and pieces all the time. You know, people just have to really put the time in, right? I mean, I've watched a bazillion videos, you know, yep, Rebel Scum days, there was not a whole lot of internet going on at that time. There was no Facebook groups. So you really would have to be involved, and you'd really have to become active in these groups, constantly talking about everything. And those days were so great for information. And even in those days, there's so many things that from then to now that they've discovered that it's probably thousands of items, right? So, and that we never really thought about.
Yeah, I still think, Jeff, I still think you need to get on it. Like, you can call it like master class or something. I mean, you could do something. I mean, just our circle of, you know, people that watch us, and then we watch them, you know. I mean, these are guys that work really hard, and they're not all vintage too, but like, you're intrigued by it, right? Like, I'm never going to collect a GI Joe, but I'll listen to you tell GI Joe stories, or Andy collected GI Joes, and I'll go see his collection and enjoy the heck out of it, because I had one or two when I was a kid. Not one or two, I had a lot, but Star Wars was kind of my love, right, as a kid. Right. So I still think that you could get out there and this is just great stuff. So yeah, or do a lot more interviews if you don't want to do any of the production value stuff. You know?
I don't mind being involved regardless, right? I don't mind doing my own thing, or if anybody, you know, I've never told anybody no, like you guys asked me. I don't mind information with anybody, right? You know, if I could help any collector understand how hard it is to get certain items. I mean, you know, I was after the Vinyl Cape Jawa on the Empire card from Toll Toys, which is Australia. I could have bought it a couple times, but it was in such bad condition that I just couldn't put myself. I mean, it was this was like 50 grand for something that was like beat to crap condition, right? And now early eBay, when we didn't even know about this variant, I remember one guy put up two. One was graded a 70, one was graded an 80, and they sold for probably $4 grand, and one for the higher one for $7 grand. And at the time, I backed off of buying it because it was the first time I'd ever saw it. You know, in hindsight, I wish I would have just pulled the trigger and got the highest graded one. I just thought, you know what, like everything else, there's got to be, you know, at least 10 or 12 of them out there, right? Well, years and years and years and years and years gone by, I never added it to my collection.
Wow.
So, you know, there's just so many different things that are so rare, you know, and I don't, you know, I got to the point in my life when I started collecting every single variant that the condition wasn't as important, right? I just wanted the damn item.
Yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, when you know, I upgraded for so many years, and it was just what you did, right? If I bought a collection, I would get them all graded. I would get them all back. I would compare them to mine. I would keep everyone. Now I'd have to look at it, because it may not be that the grade made me keep the piece. it would have to be that it looked better, or maybe it was unpunched or a little bit more clear, or, you know, whatever it was. I visually always upgraded, no matter the grade or not. I always upgraded my collection before I sold any of this stuff off. And like I said, I mean, I sold probably 12,000 graded items, and every one of those items I compared to mine before I would sell them.
That's great.
So that's how I was able to get, you know, some of the top grades in the world on my stuff. It's just years and years and years of upgrading.
That's awesome, man. I mean, Josh, I know you've done that, and I've done that to a degree too. You just do it all the way to 90s, man. That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yep.
Do you ever have $5 parties where you buy a collection and then all with loose, and then you have the whole bag of loose figures that are all beat to shit, and you're like, $5, everybody. We had $5 parties. We're like, just come on over, $5 if you want to fill in your collection.
That I would, every time I do a Star Wars celebration, I'd always bring a bunch of stuff. You would be blown away. Even like, I'm gonna say the last celebration that I was at, I was so blown away because I'd always do like a huge bin of the extra, you know, beat up loose Star Wars I'd have. You know, I do $5 a piece, and, you know, they didn't have weapons or whatever. I was blown away to how many young kids were buying vintage stuff. I'm talking like 8 to 10, you know, a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, or even today. When I go to a toy show, I'm like, what drives you to this vintage stuff? And like, well, my dad had it and I could never touch it.
There it is.
Stuff, you know.
Love it. Yeah. Or they're going to buy it for their dad because they enjoy his collecting. Yeah, that's great.
Right. So it was really cool to see, you know, I mean, they talk about how long collections are going to sustain, how long vintage. I've heard this same scenario my whole time I've ever collected. Oh, Star Wars is going to be out. It's down. Or, oh, you better sell. Oh, it's going back up. Or it's at its peak. It's at, you know, it's like it never stops.
Yeah.
Always goes up. It always goes down. It always goes up. It always goes down. You can sell it at a certain time. You know, there's not a right or wrong time, I don't think, to sell. I think if you have a high grade collection, I think at any time. You know, if you look at comics are still, there's guys that are, you know, becoming multimillionaires in their 20s, and they're just intrigued by stuff like that.
Yep.
They don't really care. They never probably read a comic, but they're like, hell, I'd rather have Superman #1, you know, just because it's rare as hell. And I think that's amazing. Right. And so that's extra money. There's the same kind of people that do that in any kind of collectibles, right? Collectible cars, collectible, you know, anything, coins. I mean, everything. It's just generational. It's just, everybody talks about, oh, the generation's going to die off and Star Wars is going to be worthless. You know, I'll tell you what, if that ever happens, I would buy my damn collection back if that stuff came down to like $50 a piece, right?
Yeah.
Just never going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's good. That's encouraging. Just knowing that that you're seeing young people get into it, and you know that this is just going to keep going. You know, it's because it is a lot of fun. You meet a lot of awesome people. We get to hang out and talk just like we did tonight. Jeff, you've been really generous with your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Yep.
The stories have been awesome, and it's nice to get into the head of somebody that has been at it for a long time, who's done it at a pretty high level, and there's still quite a bit more to come. So Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Josh, thank you. Chat. Again, we had people from Australia all the way to England in here tonight. That was pretty awesome. Cool. And Jeff, is there a best way to follow you online? Or
I'll be honest with you, I have stayed on Facebook as my primary, which is really weird. There's majority of collectors that I've known for years. That was like our first outlet after Rebel Scum.
Yeah.
So we just kind of all stuck on there instead of going to Instagram or everywhere else, you know, so that it's just that's where our home base is really. So I just stay on Facebook, and that's where majority of my Facebook friends are for Star Wars. So if you guys ever want to get a hold of me, you can always reach me you know, Jeff Jacob on Facebook.
Awesome.
You know, and if you ever, you know, I've helped so many people. If you ever have questions about collections, or, you know, the rarity of something, or, you know, the value of something, you know, shoot me a message. I don't mind helping anybody.
Well,
that's awesome, man.
Appreciate that. You're doing it the right way, and it's fun. It's fun to watch your story as it's been going, through the Hakes process, and I can't wait to see what happens next, Jeff. So thank you again. And for those watching, think big, dream big, and go play with your toys.
That's right.
Thanks, Jeff.